The morning light streamed through the tall glass windows of Maison Luxe, one of downtown Manhattan's most immaculate cafés, where success had a flavor of its own. Polished marble counters reflected the city's hum, and the espresso machines sang a precise, mechanical rhythm. The regulars were executives, socialites, and early risers chasing caffeine and validation in equal measure. Behind the counter stood Emily Chen, 26, dressed in the café's signature black apron over a crisp white shirt. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, neat and practical. There was nothing particularly striking about her to the hurried eyes of the customers, just another efficient employee, moving from table to table with quiet grace. Yet her eyes carried a stillness, the kind of calm that only came from someone who had seen and lost far more than she let on. Emily's morning had been uneventful until the door opened and 3 men stepped inside, their presence shifting the air instantly. The first man walked like he owned the world, or perhaps more accurately, like he had bought it once and planned to do so again. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, a navy tie knotted just so, and a watch that gleamed faintly in the morning light. Adrian Wu, CEO of WTech Global, billionaire, and one of the most influential figures in international tech, had arrived unannounced. The staff recognized him immediately. Whispers fluttered through the room like moths around a flame. That's him. Adrian Wu, the one from Forbes. Didn't he just buy an AI company for $2 billion? Why is he here? He doesn't even drink coffee. Emily noticed the murmurs but didn't look up right away. She had learned long ago that some people came with gravity, they drew others into orbit whether you wanted to or not. Still, she kept her tone steady as she approached their table. Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Maison Luxe. What can I get started for you? Adrian didn't look at her at first. His eyes were still on his phone, scrolling through something she couldn't see. One of his companions, a tall, tanned man with slick back hair and an expensive grin, spoke instead. Mr. Wu, are you sure you want to sit here? There's a private lounge upstairs, he said, his tone deferential. Adrian waved him off. This is fine. He finally looked up, his gaze assessing Emily the way one might inspect a piece of fine equipment, evaluating, impersonal, detached. I'll have a latte, he said, pausing for a heartbeat before smirking faintly. Actually, make that ibe nadi, jia dian y nai, bia tai tong. The words flowed easily from his tongue, fluent Mandarin spoken with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His companions chuckled softly. One of them added, good luck with that. I doubt they even know what you said. Emily's hand stilled briefly over her notepad. There it was, that familiar tone. The kind that assumed more than it asked, that tested dignity just to see if it would break. She looked up, her gaze calm and clear, and said in flawless English, certainly, sir. 1 latte, lightly warmed milk. Then, after a pause, she added with the faintest hint of a smile, would you like soy instead? It's fresh today. Adrian's head tilted slightly. His eyes flickered in surprise before narrowing. You understood that? Her lips curved, almost playfully. Of course. Mandarin is a beautiful language. She turned and walked back toward the counter, leaving behind a silence heavy enough to taste. The men exchanged glances. One muttered under his breath, well, that's new. Adrian watched her go, something unreadable crossing his face. He was a man used to being the most interesting person in any room, yet now he found himself watching a cafe waitress like she was a riddle written in plain sight. Behind the counter, Emily prepared his order with her usual precision. She didn't rush. Every motion was deliberate, steam hissing, milk swirling, espresso dripping in perfect rhythm. She could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't look up. If there was one thing she had learned in this city, it was that people like Adrian Wu noticed you only when you didn't try to be noticed. When she returned to the table, the air felt denser somehow. She placed the cup in front of him carefully, the faint aroma of roasted beans filling the space between them. Your latte, sir, she said evenly. Warm milk, not too hot. He leaned back, regarding her with renewed curiosity. You speak Mandarin fluently, he said. It wasn't a question. I do, she replied, her tone professional. Would you like anything else? His lips quirked in faint amusement. Where did you learn it? She hesitated only briefly. Family, she said. And a few years living abroad. He studied her face, the subtle confidence behind her composure. Where abroad? Different places. It was a non-answer, but it carried the quiet finality of a door gently closing. Adrian smiled faintly, intrigued. Most people gave him what he wanted, this woman gave him boundaries. That, more than her fluency, caught his attention. Interesting, he said finally. What's your name? Emily. Emily, he repeated slowly, as if testing the sound. Do you enjoy working here? I enjoy earning a living, Mr. Wu, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other customers. His brows lifted in surprise, and for a fleeting second, he almost looked amused. Of course. She turned away, the faint click of her heels disappearing behind the hum of the espresso machine. His companions began whispering again. Bold little thing, isn't she? One remarked. Adrian didn't respond. He sipped his coffee slowly, his gaze following her reflection in the glass display case. There was something oddly deliberate about her calm, a woman who carried silence like armor. 10 minutes later, when she brought the check, he slipped a black credit card inside the leather folio, along with a folded note. She placed it back on the counter without glancing at it until he left. The door chimed softly as the three men exited, the cafe returning to its usual rhythm. When Emily finally opened the folio, her breath caught for just a moment. The bill had been $8.45. The tip, $2,000. And beneath the card, a small note in bold handwriting, if you ever get tired of this, call me. Adrian Wu. She stared at it for a long moment, her pulse steady but her thoughts anything but. She knew that name far too well. WTech Global. 3 years ago, she had watched that same name printed across documents that once bore hers. Her signature had been erased, her credit stolen, her career dissolved under someone else's triumph. And standing in front of her this morning had been the man at the center of it all, the CEO who had never known her name, only her work. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket, her expression unreadable. Then she took a deep breath, forced her shoulders to relax, and turned back to the counter to take the next order. Across town, Adrian Wu sat in the back of his car, the city's skyline glinting through tinted windows. He scrolled through his emails, but his mind was elsewhere, on the woman at the cafe who had matched him word for word in his native tongue and walked away like she hadn't just startled a billionaire. She's interesting, he murmured. His driver, used to silence, said nothing. Adrian's assistant, seated beside him, looked up from his tablet. Who, sir? The waitress. Emily Chen. He said the name softly, tasting its simplicity. Do me a favor, Mark. Pull her file. I want to know where she's from. Of course, sir. Any particular reason? Adrian's gaze drifted to the city beyond the window, the endless pulse of ambition and noise. Call it curiosity. He didn't add what he was thinking, that there was something familiar about her, something just out of reach, like a melody he'd heard long ago but couldn't quite place. At Maison Luxe, Emily finished her shift in silence. The other baristas were buzzing, gossiping about the tip, about the CEO, about how he'd looked at her. Girl, you should call him, said Lena, her coworker, leaning over the counter. Do you know who that was? That's, like, the Elon Musk of Asia. Emily smiled faintly. That's exactly why I shouldn't. Lena rolled her eyes. You're crazy. $2,000 just for a latte and a smile. You could retire on that energy. I don't need that kind of attention, Emily said quietly. Some people give you things because they want to feel powerful. It's not generosity, it's leverage. Lena frowned. You talk like you know him. Emily's hands paused for just a second as she stacked cups, but then she smiled again, a practiced, easy smile. I've met his kind before. Outside, the sun had started to set, Manhattan bathed in amber light. Emily clocked out, slipped into her worn gray coat, and stepped into the chill evening air. She walked past glass towers and glowing billboards, past the wealth that glittered like it was eternal. For her, it wasn't envy that filled her chest, but memory. 3 years ago, she had been in those buildings. Boardrooms, presentations, prototypes. She had spoken languages that bridged continents, built software that translated emotion as well as words. Until someone had decided that her success looked better with someone else's name on it. The world called it corporate restructuring. Emily called it what it was, erasure. Now, the man behind that erasure had ordered coffee from her, smirked at her intelligence, and handed her a tip that could pay her rent for months. The irony would have been delicious if it didn't sting so much. At a crosswalk, she stopped and looked up. High above, the WTech Global logo shimmered against the skyline, silver letters gleaming like a reminder. She exhaled slowly, tucking her hands into her pockets. The folded note in her apron pressed faintly against her palm. She wasn't going to call him. Not yet. But she couldn't shake the feeling that fate had just opened a door she'd spent 3 years trying to close. And somewhere, deep down, she knew Adrian Wu wasn't the kind of man who left mysteries unsolved. The following morning began like any other for Emily. The cafe doors opened to the scent of roasted beans and the hum of soft jazz. But beneath the routine calm, something in the air felt heavier, like the stillness before a storm. Emily had convinced herself that Adrian Wu's visit the day before was a fleeting anomaly. People like him didn't remember people like her. They swept through places, left impressions, and moved on. The note, the tip, even his sudden interest, it would all fade into nothing. But deep down, she knew better. Power never forgot curiosity. By mid-morning, the cafe was bustling. Emily was behind the counter taking orders when the door opened again, and silence rippled through the crowd. Conversations faltered, cups clinked against saucers, and even the barista at the espresso machine looked up. Adrian Wu had returned. He wasn't alone this time. A young assistant trailed him, tablet in hand, but Adrian's attention was fixed on Emily. His expression was calm, polite even, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, the look of a man who had come seeking answers. "Good morning, Miss Chen," he said. Emily looked up, her professionalism intact. "Good morning, Mr. Wu." "The usual?" His mouth curved faintly. "You remember?" "Of course." He took a seat at the same table as before, ignoring the curious stares from nearby customers. The assistant hovered awkwardly until Adrian waved him off. "Order something for yourself. I want to speak with Miss Chen privately." Emily hesitated, pen hovering over her notepad. "I can have your drink ready in a few minutes." He nodded. "And after that, sit for a moment. I'd like to ask you something." It wasn't a request. It was the kind of statement that carried quiet authority, but also intrigue. Emily's chest tightened, but she simply nodded and turned toward the espresso bar. Her co-workers exchanged glances, whispering behind their hands. Is he serious? Did she know him before? Emily ignored them. She focused on the motions, steam, pour, stir, but her mind refused to settle. Every instinct told her to keep her distance. Still, curiosity had a gravity of its own, and Adrian Wu was a force that drew everything into orbit. When she brought the drink to his table, he gestured to the seat across from him. "Please. I shouldn't." "Pierre," Adrian called to the manager, who nearly tripped over himself hurrying over. "Why yes, Mr. Wu. I'd like to have a brief discussion with your employee. She'll be back on duty shortly." Pierre smiled nervously. "Of course, sir. Take all the time you need." Emily's jaw tightened. She hated how easily authority bent the rules for men like him. Still, she sat down, back straight, face neutral. Adrian studied her for a moment before speaking. "You surprised me yesterday." "I gathered that." "I'm not used to being surprised," he continued, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "Most people tell me what they think I want to hear. You didn't." "I didn't have a reason to." He smiled slightly. "Maybe you should. You'd get further." "Further where?" she asked, her voice even. "Into a world that already decided who deserves credit." His eyes narrowed. "What makes you say that?" Emily hesitated. She hadn't meant to sound so sharp. "Nothing. Just an observation." He leaned forward, his tone quiet. "You remind me of someone I used to work with. She was brilliant, sharp, unafraid to challenge people. Until she vanished." Emily's pulse quickened, but she forced a polite smile. "Maybe she found better things to do." "Maybe," he said softly. Or maybe someone drove her away. Their eyes locked for a fraction of a second, too long, too heavy. Emily broke the gaze first. "Mr. Wu, I really should get back to work." He reached into his pocket, producing a sleek black business card and sliding it across the table. "I meant what I said yesterday. If you ever want to do more than pour coffee, call me. I have positions open at WTech that could use someone with your precision." Emily looked at the card but didn't touch it. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy where I am." He tilted his head, intrigued. "Are you?" Her smile was professional, almost mechanical. "I am." Adrian leaned back, studying her as if trying to read something invisible. "You know," he said finally, "people don't usually say no to me." "I'm not people," she replied. For the first time, Adrian laughed, not a polite chuckle, but genuine amusement. "Fair enough, Miss Chen." He stood, slipping the card back into his jacket. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." She nodded once. "Have a good day, Mr. Wu." As he left, his assistant hurried after him, looking confused. The door closed, and the noise of the cafe returned. But the silence he left behind inside Emily's mind was deafening. That evening, Adrian sat in his office on the 87th floor of WTech Global's headquarters. The city glittered below, indifferent and infinite. He should have been reviewing quarterly reports, but his focus kept drifting. "Mark," he said, glancing up at his assistant, who stood nervously by the door. "Yes, sir. Did you get that background check I asked for?" Mark nodded quickly, handing over a slim folder. "Preliminary results came in this morning. Emily Chen, 26, currently employed at Maison Lux for 2 years. Prior to that, nothing particularly noteworthy. Community college records, a brief internship in corporate translation, no criminal history, no major affiliations." Adrian flipped through the pages, frowning. "That's it?" "Afraid so. Looks perfectly ordinary." Adrian closed the folder slowly. Ordinary. That was what bothered him most. She was too articulate, too composed, too educated for someone who just stumbled into a barista job. People didn't hide brilliance without a reason. "Run a deeper check," he said finally. "Employment history before the internship. Academic records, foreign transcripts, anything she might have scrubbed." Mark hesitated. "Sir, that's..." Adrian looked up, and the conversation ended there. "Do it." "Yes, sir." When the door closed, Adrian leaned back, staring out at the skyline. His reflection glimmered faintly against the window, a man who had everything but still couldn't shake the curiosity over a stranger who spoke his language too perfectly. Back in her tiny apartment, Emily stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like scattered fireflies. The business card lay on the table beside her untouched, but she didn't need to look at it to remember every letter. She'd seen that logo before, printed on patent filings that should have carried her name. She still remembered the meeting, the day she had been told her work was reallocated. The translation AI she built during her fellowship had been rebranded, patented under Tekka's ownership. Her mentor had apologized, saying there was nothing he could do. "It's business," he'd said. "You'll understand someday." But understanding hadn't paid her rent when her research funding was pulled. It hadn't protected her from the quiet blacklisting that followed. One day, she was a rising linguist in the corporate AI division, the next, she was a ghost. She picked up the card, turning it between her fingers. Adrian Wu's name stared back at her in embossed silver. He doesn't remember, she thought. Why would he? He probably never even saw my face. Still, something about his eyes lingered, not arrogance this time, but genuine interest. The kind of curiosity that made her uneasy. Emily set the card down and opened her laptop. Lines of code filled the screen, her private project, the one she'd been building in secret since the day she lost everything. A translation framework that worked without corporate control, without algorithms that monetized emotion. She called it Lingua Heart. It wasn't finished yet, but it was hers, every line, every algorithm, every thought. And she would protect it, even if that meant staying invisible forever. At WTech the next morning, Mark entered Adrian's office holding another file, his expression uneasy. "Sir, you might want to see this." Adrian looked up from his laptop. "What did you find?" Emily Chen didn't just intern in translation. She was listed in an old research registry under a different department, linguistic AI development. The name appeared in an internal file from 2020, Project Linguaheart. Adrian froze. That's impossible. It's right here. Mark handed over the document. But her name was removed from the final patent before public filing. The only credited author is Dr. Michael Latham. Adrian's eyes darkened. He remembered Latham, brilliant, manipulative, one of Tekka's most notorious department heads. He'd left the company 2 years ago under quiet circumstances. The project had gone on to earn WTech millions. And now, sitting quietly in a Manhattan cafe, was a woman who had built it. Adrian leaned back in his chair, the weight of realization settling in. Find out everything about her separation from the company, he said quietly. And keep this between us. Mark nodded, retreating. Adrian sat alone for a long time, the memory of Emily's calm expression flickering in his mind. The way she'd spoken Mandarin, not just fluently, but authentically. That same fluency had been a core principle of Linguaheart, a system designed to translate emotion, not just words. He remembered telling his investors at the time, "We want AI that doesn't just hear language, but feels it." But the one who had actually made that possible had vanished. Until now. That evening, Adrian returned to Maison Lux. Emily noticed him the second he entered, the smooth confidence in his stride, the precision of his presence. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Good evening, Mr. Wu." He smiled faintly. "Working late again?" "Someone has to. Do you have a moment?" She hesitated, then nodded toward the side counter. "Just finishing up." When she approached, he gestured to the empty seat across from him. She didn't sit this time. "What can I do for you, Mr. Wu?" He looked at her, his tone quieter now. "I think I owe you an apology." "For what?" she asked carefully. "For what my company did. For what I did, even if I didn't know it." Emily's fingers tightened against the counter. "You did your job, Mr. Wu. Everyone did." He shook his head. "Not everyone loses their work and disappears. I didn't know about Project Linguaheart until this morning." The words hung between them, raw and heavy. Emily's face didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered, recognition, pain, defiance. "I see you've done your research," she said finally. "I had to. I don't like loose ends." "People aren't loose ends," she replied softly. He met her gaze. "You're right. And I want to make this right." She exhaled slowly, her calm composure cracking just slightly. "You can't undo the past, Mr. Wu." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I can offer you a future." Emily studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "The last time I worked for your company, I lost everything. I'm not interested in repeating that." "This isn't a job offer," he said quietly. "It's a chance to reclaim what's yours." Her eyes narrowed. "And what's the catch?" He smiled faintly. "You'll have to trust me to find out." She turned away, heart pounding. "Trust is expensive, Mr. Wu. And I'm afraid I can't afford it." Adrian's smile faded, but his voice stayed gentle. "Then I'll have to earn it." He placed his business card on the counter again, same as before, only this time, the gesture carried gravity instead of arrogance. "I'll be waiting for your call," he said quietly, then left the cafe. Emily stood frozen for a long time, the hum of the espresso machine filling the silence around her. She didn't pick up the card right away. But she didn't throw it away, either. Because for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't sure if she was running from the past, or being called back to finish what she'd started. The next few days passed in a haze of restless thoughts for both Emily and Adrian. Their worlds, once divided by wealth and circumstance, now orbited the same unspoken truth, something that began years ago was stirring again. Neither wanted to admit how much the other lingered in their mind. At Maison Lux, Emily worked with the same precision and grace as always, but her coworkers noticed the faint distraction behind her calm. She moved through her shift efficiently, yet her eyes drifted toward the door every time the bell chimed. She told herself she was only watching for another surprise visit, but the truth went deeper. The past she'd buried wasn't buried anymore. Meanwhile, high above the city, Adrian Wu stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his corner office, gazing out at the skyline. WTech Global's headquarters looked untouchable from the outside: steel, glass, and power. But for the first time in years, Adrian didn't feel like the man who controlled it all. He felt like someone chasing a shadow he should have noticed long ago. "Sir," his assistant Mark said, stepping in quietly. "I compiled the full report you asked for." Adrian turned, taking the folder. "Let me guess, more buried secrets." Mark hesitated. "You could say that." Adrian sat, opening the file slowly. The first few pages detailed familiar things: company correspondence, board approvals, project memos. But then came the internal messages, the signatures, the hidden annotations in old archives. Each page revealed how a young research fellow named Emily Chen had been systematically erased from her own creation. "She was right," Adrian muttered. "They stole her." "More than that," Mark said. "Dr. Latham not only removed her name from the patent but filed a suppression clause. It's why her employment records were locked. She couldn't prove ownership without access to internal archives." Adrian's jaw tightened. He remembered Latham's arrogance, how he'd always taken credit for his team's work. At the time, Adrian had been too consumed by mergers and investors to notice what was happening beneath him. "How much of LinguaHeart came from her?" Mark paused. "Almost all of it, sir. The foundational algorithm, the adaptive syntax recognition, the emotional tonality mapping, that was her design. Without her framework, the system wouldn't exist." Adrian leaned back, silent for a long moment. He remembered the night of the launch 3 years ago, the celebration, the applause, the reporters calling LinguaHeart the future of AI communication. They'd toasted to innovation, to progress, to his vision. But it wasn't his vision. It had been hers. "Find out where Dr. Latham is now," Adrian said. Mark blinked. "Sir. Find him. I don't care how." His voice was quiet but sharp. "If he's the reason she lost everything, I intend to make him answer for it." "Yes, sir." When Mark left, Adrian stared at the file on his desk. Emily's name appeared again and again, half visible in deleted footnotes, archived emails, backup logs. She'd been there all along, hidden between the lines of his empire. And now, he couldn't ignore her. Across the city, Emily sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, coffee growing cold beside her. The screen glowed softly, displaying lines of code, her private project, LinguaHeart's true descendant. She was debugging a line when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. She considered ignoring it, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello. Miss Chen," came the calm, deep voice she recognized instantly. Her breath caught. "Mr. Wu. I apologize for calling unannounced," Adrian said. "But I need to speak with you. It's important." "I told you, Mr. Wu. I'm not interested in working for WTech again." "This isn't about work," he said quietly. "It's about truth." Emily hesitated. "Truth?" "I found your name," he continued. "In the original archives. You were right. LinguaHeart was yours." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unreal. She hadn't expected him to admit it, not him, not ever. "You went through the archives?" she asked, her voice low. "I had to. I needed to understand." He paused. "Emily, I owe you more than an apology. What happened to you wasn't just unethical, it was theft. And it happened under my leadership." Her hand trembled slightly, but her tone stayed even. "You didn't steal it personally." "No," he said. "But I benefited from it. I built an empire on technology that carried your fingerprints." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "So what now? You call to ease your conscience." He didn't answer for a moment. "I want to make it right." Emily laughed softly, without humor. "Right. Do you even know what that means? You can't rewrite history, Mr. Wu." "I can't rewrite it," he said, "but maybe I can correct it." She wanted to hang up, to shut the door on this conversation before it reopened old wounds. But something in his tone stopped her, earnest, remorseful, human. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he added. I'm asking for a chance to give back what was taken. Why? She asked. What do you gain from this? Maybe I'm tired of being the man who didn't notice, he said softly. Meet me tomorrow. Noon. Central Park Conservatory. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Emily sat there for a long time, staring at the silent phone. The city moved outside her window, indifferent and loud. Somewhere inside her, resentment warred with curiosity. 3 years of silence had hardened her heart, but maybe, just maybe, there were things worth hearing after all. The next day dawned crisp and cold. The sky hung pale and clear above Central Park, where bare trees shivered under winter light. Emily walked slowly along the gravel path, her coat drawn tight, her breath clouding in front of her. She spotted Adrian near the fountain, standing alone, hands in his coat pockets. He turned as she approached, offering a nod that was neither formal nor casual, somewhere in between. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure why I did, she said honestly. Because part of you still wants to be heard, he replied. And part of me needs to listen. For a moment, they stood in silence. The sound of water, the distant laughter of joggers, it all blurred into the background. I spoke with Dr. Latham, Adrian said finally. Or tried to. He's been living in Zurich. Retired early, quite comfortably. Emily's expression didn't change, but her voice tightened. Of course he did. I confronted him, Adrian continued. He didn't deny it. Said the company needed a figurehead, not a young idealist. He claimed he was protecting the project. Her eyes flashed. Protecting it? He destroyed everything I worked for. Adrian nodded. I know. That's why I'm here. I'm dissolving the old patent. Legally, it'll take time, but when it's complete, the credit will return to you. You'll be recognized as the original creator of LinguaHeart. Emily's breath caught. You do that? It's the least I can do. She studied him carefully. You realize what that means? You'd lose millions. Maybe more. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time I learned what integrity costs. For the first time, she saw something in him that wasn't arrogance or calculation. It was sincerity. But sincerity was dangerous, it made forgiveness feel possible. I don't need recognition, she said finally. Not anymore. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my memory. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, You remind me of who I wanted to be before this world turned me into who I am. Emily blinked, taken aback by the vulnerability in his words. He continued, I started W-Tech because I believed in communication. Not profit, not influence, connection. Somewhere along the way, I stopped listening. Meeting you reminded me of that. Her throat tightened, and for once, she didn't have a clever response. The air between them softened, almost fragile. Tell me something, he said after a while. Are you still working on your own version of it? Her eyes widened slightly. How do you? He smiled faintly. I recognized your framework in the new syntax models surfacing online. You've been rebuilding LinguaHeart, haven't you? Emily hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's not LinguaHeart anymore. It's something better. Something honest. What do you call it? LinguaSoul, she said quietly. It doesn't translate just meaning, it translates emotion. It understands tone, empathy, hesitation. It doesn't just bridge words. It bridges intent. Adrian listened, genuine fascination in his eyes. You built that alone. I had to. He smiled slightly. Then let me help you. Emily shook her head instantly. No. I don't need your company's name tied to it. Not again. This isn't about the company, he said. It's about finishing what you started, with the resources you deserve. No strings. There are always strings, she said softly. He took a step closer, voice lower. Maybe not this time. She met his gaze, her heart pounding. Why me, Mr. Wu? Why now? Because you reminded me what it means to build something worth believing in, he said quietly. And because I'm done pretending that I don't care who gets the credit. She turned away, unsure what to say. The honesty in his tone unsettled her more than any lie could have. For 3 years, she had hated the man who benefited from her pain. Now, standing here, she didn't know whether to thank him or run. By the time she left the park, the afternoon sun had turned the city gold. She walked home through quiet streets, the conversation replaying in her mind. Adrian Wu, the man she once saw as untouchable, was now human in a way she hadn't expected. And though she didn't fully trust him, a small part of her wanted to believe him. That night, she opened her laptop again. Her screen glowed with the code of Linguasoul. The project was close to completion, months of sleepless nights distilled into something beautiful. She hesitated for a long time, then typed one new line at the top of the document, dedicated to the voice that was finally heard. Across the city, in his penthouse, Adrian looked out at the same skyline. He thought about Emily's expression when he told her the truth, the disbelief, the guarded hope. For the first time in years, he felt something other than victory. He felt peace. But peace was fleeting. And deep down, both of them knew the story wasn't over yet. Because in the world of power and innovation, truth was never simple, and the ghosts of the past had a way of returning just when you thought you'd outrun them. A week passed after their meeting in Central Park, but for both Emily and Adrian, it lingered like a melody that refused to fade. The truth had surfaced, but what came after was harder to define. For the first time in years, the billionaire and the barista shared something that didn't fit neatly into profit margins or moral boundaries, a quiet understanding that neither of them had expected. At Maison Luxe, the days rolled on as usual. Emily poured coffee, served pastries, and smiled at strangers. But her hands moved slower now, her thoughts heavier. Her co-workers noticed, of course. "You've been off all week," Lena said one afternoon as they restocked the pastry case. "Is it about that CEO guy again?" Emily gave a small laugh. "You make it sound like a soap opera." Lena crossed her arms. "Come on. The whole city's talking about him lately. Tech is restructuring, patents being reviewed, people saying he's changing everything. That's not normal billionaire behavior." Emily didn't respond. She knew exactly what Lena was talking about. She had seen the headlines too: WTech CEO reopens old patent files in unprecedented audit. The press speculated wildly, calling it an ethical reform, a PR stunt, a midlife crisis. None of them knew the truth. Every article mentioned one phrase that made Emily's stomach twist: Project Linguaheart. Her project. Her ghost. Across town, Adrian stood before a packed conference room of his board members. The skyline behind him glowed silver in the afternoon sun. He had just announced his decision to dissolve the existing patent ownership on Linguaheart and reinstate its original creator. The room was silent for a beat before erupting into disbelief. "You can't be serious," said one executive. "You're giving up exclusive rights to a billion-dollar asset." Adrian's voice was calm but firm. "I'm correcting a mistake." Another board member scoffed. "This isn't a charity. The company will lose credibility." "No," Adrian said. "We'll gain it." He met each of their eyes, steady and unflinching. WTech was built on innovation and integrity. "I refuse to let history say we succeeded by theft." There was more arguing, more warnings about investor reactions, but Adrian didn't waver. He'd made his decision the night he met Emily again. For too long, his empire had been built on silent voices. He wouldn't let her stay buried. When the meeting ended, he returned to his office, exhausted but resolute. He looked at the framed award on his shelf, Visionary of the Year, and felt nothing but irony. For the first time, he understood what vision really meant. It wasn't about seeing opportunity, it was about recognizing truth. He picked up his phone, hesitating for a long time before typing a message: "I'd like to see you again." No business, no company talk. Just coffee. Adrian. He hit send before he could change his mind. Emily received the message that evening. She stared at it for several minutes, unsure whether to laugh, sigh, or delete it. The last time she'd shared coffee with Adrian Wu, she'd been behind the counter. Maybe that was safer. But curiosity was a dangerous thing, and it had already led her here once. She typed back, "Tomorrow. 8 a.m. Maison Luxe." Before the rush. When Adrian arrived the next morning, the cafe was nearly empty. Early sunlight spilled across the tiled floor, and the quiet hum of the espresso machine filled the air. Emily was already there, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, half smiling. "Still prefer the expensive suits, I see," she said lightly. He smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard." She gestured to a small corner table. "Sit. I'll make the coffee this time." A few minutes later, she joined him with 2 mugs. The silence between them was softer now, not awkward, just charged with the unspoken. "So," she said, "the great Adrian Wu makes headlines for giving back something most people didn't know was stolen." He met her gaze. "You saw it? It's hard to miss. The internet loves a redemption story." Adrian chuckled under his breath. "Maybe I do too." She tilted her head. "What made you really do it?" "Guilt?" "Partly," he admitted. "But also, respect. Respect doesn't undo the damage." "No," he said quietly, "but it can start the repair." Emily studied him. There was sincerity in his tone that unnerved her. The man sitting across from her wasn't a cold executive from 3 years ago. He seemed lighter, somehow. As if peeling back the truth had freed him too. "You know," she said softly, "when they took Lingua Heart from me, I thought I'd never create again. I lost my faith in people. In systems. In fairness." She paused, tracing the rim of her cup. "I still don't believe in fairness. But I believe in redemption now. Maybe." He smiled gently. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably," she said with a faint smirk. "But I'll take progress over perfection." For a while, they just sat there, the city waking up around them. It wasn't a business meeting, nor a reconciliation. It was something quieter, 2 people rebuilding something invisible between them. Finally, Adrian said, "There's something else I wanted to tell you. I'm launching a new foundation, independent of WTech. It'll fund open-source AI research, especially for linguistic and emotional technology. I want to name it after your work. Lingua Heart belongs to the world now." Emily blinked. "You're serious?" He nodded. "I want the world to know where it began, with you." Emotion flickered across her face, surprise, disbelief, and something softer. "You don't owe me that." "I owe the truth that much," he said. Later that afternoon, they walked together through Bryant Park, cups of coffee in hand. The conversation flowed more easily now, about languages, about their pasts, about the strange loneliness of ambition. For the first time, Adrian talked not as a CEO but as a man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what sunlight felt like. "I spent years trying to control everything," he said quietly. "People, outcomes, even emotions. But you can't control connection. You either have it, or you don't." Emily looked at him thoughtfully. "You sound like someone who's been listening to my old research notes." He laughed softly. "Maybe I have." They reached a park bench and sat. The city pulsed around them, alive and indifferent. For a while, neither spoke. It was enough just to sit there, the distance between their worlds shrinking one quiet moment at a time. "I've been thinking," Adrian said suddenly. "About your new project, Linguasoul." Her brow arched. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Not easily." He smiled. "I'm not asking to invest or buy it. I just want to help, mentorship, protection, legal backing. Whatever you need." She hesitated. "Why?" He looked out over the park, the wind stirring his hair. "Because I believe in it. And because I believe in you." The words hung in the air, heavy but gentle. Emily's heart gave an involuntary ache, not from romance, but recognition. It had been years since someone had said they believed in her without an agenda. "Mr. Wu." "Adrian," he corrected softly. "Adrian," she said carefully. "Belief is powerful. Dangerous, too." "I know," he said. "But I'm willing to risk it." For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a silent understanding that this was no longer about restitution or revenge. It was about trust, fragile and real. That evening, Emily returned to her apartment and opened her laptop. A new message notification blinked on her screen: WTech Foundation, Lingua Heart Initiative, press release draft. Adrian had sent her the statement before going public. He wanted her approval. She scrolled through the document, reading every word. It credited her fully, Dr. Emily Chen, lead creator of the LinguaHeart Framework, 2019. For the first time, her name existed in print beside her creation. She sat back, overwhelmed. The quiet victory didn't come with confetti or applause, just peace. And that was enough. After a long pause, she typed a short reply, approved. Then, almost impulsively, she added one more line, thank you. 2 days later, the press release exploded online. Social media lit up with praise, intrigue, and disbelief. News outlets hailed Adrian's decision as revolutionary. Tekka's CEO admits past wrongdoing, credits former employee for breakthrough. The story dominated headlines for days. Emily avoided interviews. She wasn't interested in fame. But her inbox filled with messages from students, developers, and researchers thanking her for inspiring them. For the first time in years, her name meant something more than what she'd lost. One evening, as she closed up the cafe, Adrian appeared again, this time without a suit, without entourage. Just a man in a simple gray sweater, holding 2 cups of coffee. You didn't think I'd stop coming here, did you? He said with a faint grin. Emily smiled. I should have known better. They sat by the window, the city glowing outside. Neither spoke for a while. There was no need. You know, Adrian said softly, you've changed how I see things. Not just business. People. Myself. Good, she said. Maybe that's what language is supposed to do, change how we listen. He looked at her with quiet admiration. I think you're right. For the first time, there was no tension, no guilt, no power imbalance. Just 2 people who had finally learned to speak the same language, one built on honesty, humility, and something dangerously close to trust. As the night deepened and the cafe emptied, Emily looked out at the glittering skyline and thought of how far she'd come. Not just from the girl who'd been erased, but from the woman who'd learned to forgive. She wasn't sure where this strange connection with Adrian would lead, friendship, partnership, or something beyond either. But for now, it was enough. She turned to him and said quietly, coffee's on me this time. He smiled, raising his cup. Then let's call it even. And for the first time, both of them believed it. In the weeks following the public announcement, life began to shift for both Emily and Adrian in ways neither could have predicted. For the first time in 3 years, Emily walked through the city without the weight of invisibility. Her name, once erased from every record that mattered, now appeared in magazines, interviews, and panels celebrating ethical innovation. But she avoided the spotlight as much as possible. Her victories had never been about fame, they were about voice. And yet, as much as she told herself she was fine, there was an unease building in the background, the knowledge that not everyone celebrated her return. At WTech headquarters, the atmosphere was less triumphant. While the public hailed Adrian's move as revolutionary, some within his company viewed it as betrayal. Old board members grumbled about lost profits, and former allies whispered about weakness disguised as morality. Adrian, however, didn't care. He had traded admiration for clarity, and it was a trade he would make again. Sir, Mark said one afternoon, entering his office, I thought you should see this. He handed Adrian a printed email, anonymous, and signed. The message was simple, venomous. You think you can rewrite history, but people like her don't belong in your world. Watch who you trust. Adrian's jaw clenched. He had expected backlash, but not this kind of personal venom. Trace it, he said quietly. Mark nodded. Already on it. When he left, Adrian stared at the message for a long time. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. When you challenge a system built on exploitation, it doesn't collapse quietly, it fights back. Meanwhile, Emily's project, Linguasoul, began gaining quiet momentum. She had posted fragments of her research online, inviting collaboration from linguists and AI developers around the world. Her inbox overflowed with proposals and partnerships, but she was careful. She wanted independence this time, no more corporations, no more contracts written in invisible ink. Then, one afternoon, she received an unexpected call. Emily Chen. The voice on the line was familiar, deep, confident. Mr. Wu, she said with a small smile. Don't tell me you've decided to order another latte in Mandarin. He laughed softly. Not quite. I was calling to ask a favor. A favor? Yes, he said. We're hosting an innovation conference next week, keynote on ethical AI. The press wants you to speak about LinguaHeart. I thought, maybe you'd tell the story yourself this time. Emily froze. A keynote? Me? Who better, he asked. You built it. I'm not a speaker. You are now, he said gently. You've been silenced long enough. Let people hear your voice. She hesitated, heart pounding. The thought of standing in front of hundreds of people terrified her. But maybe that was the point. I'll think about it, she said finally. Do more than think, Adrian replied softly. Do it for yourself. The night before the conference, Emily couldn't sleep. She paced her apartment, rehearsing words she didn't believe she was ready to say. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the same reflection, a woman who had survived, but not yet claimed victory. It wasn't just fear holding her back, it was memory. 3 years ago, she had stood in a similar auditorium, presenting her research to a panel of executives, including Adrian Wu. Back then, she'd been bright-eyed, full of faith in her work. She had no idea it would be stolen within weeks. Now she would stand again, but this time as herself. By dawn, she was ready. The conference hall gleamed under soft lights. Banners bearing Tekka's new slogan lined the walls, innovation with integrity. Reporters buzzed around, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in anticipation. When Adrian arrived, people swarmed him for statements. He smiled politely but said little, his attention scanning the room until he found her, Emily, standing near the stage, dressed in a simple black blazer and white blouse. Her calm was deceptive, he could see the nerves in the way she gripped her notes. You look ready, he said quietly, approaching her. She gave him a wry smile. That makes one of us. Just speak like you did to me that first day, he said. When you reminded me that decency isn't optional. The rest will follow. Emily nodded. I'll try not to bring up your arrogance in the introduction. He chuckled. That might actually improve the ratings. A few minutes later, the host announced her name. The applause began, hesitant at first, then building as people recognized the story, the woman who had reclaimed her creation. Emily stepped up to the podium. The lights were blinding, the silence enormous. She took a breath. 3 years ago, she began, I stood in a different conference room, in front of people who told me my work would change the world. It did, just not in the way I imagined. The audience leaned forward. I created a system called LinguaHeart, a bridge between language and emotion. It was designed to help people understand not just words, but feelings. Then it was taken from me. She paused, steadying her voice. For a long time, I thought that was the end. But it wasn't. Because ideas, like people, don't disappear when silenced. They adapt. They find new voices. The room was utterly still. I stand here today not as a victim of theft, but as proof that silence doesn't erase truth. Technology should connect, not consume. It should serve humanity, not ownership. She glanced at Adrian briefly, their eyes meeting for a fraction of a second. And sometimes, even those who make mistakes can choose to make them right. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed, people stood, and for the first time, Emily felt something inside her unclench, the freedom of being seen for what she truly was. Afterward, reporters crowded her, questions flying. She smiled politely, answering only what mattered. When Adrian approached, the crowd parted instinctively. You did it, he said softly. I did, she replied. And I didn't faint. That's a bonus. He laughed, genuine pride in his eyes. You were brilliant. Don't get used to me taking your stage, she teased. You can have it, he said. I've talked enough for one lifetime. They walked together through the hallway toward the exit, flashes following them like starlight. It didn't feel like CEO and employee anymore, just two people walking through the noise they created, finally in control of it. Outside, the winter wind bit through their coats. The city was alive, pulsing with light and sound. Emily looked up at the skyscrapers and smiled faintly. You ever think about how strange it is, she said. One decision can ruin a life. And another can rebuild it. Adrian nodded. I think about that every day. She looked at him, curious. And what did it cost you? He smiled faintly. Everything worth losing. Later that night, Emily found herself unable to sleep again, but this time, it wasn't fear. She opened her laptop and logged into Linguasoul's framework. Thousands of users had joined overnight, developers contributing code, artists testing translation prototypes. The dream she had once built in silence now lived in 1,000 voices. She opened the collaboration dashboard. At the top, a new message blinked. For every word you gave the world, here's one you gave back to me, hope. Adrian. Emily smiled, warmth rising in her chest. Maybe, she thought, that was what language was for, not communication, but connection. The following week, TECA's board finally ratified Adrian's reforms. Dozens of suppressed patents were reopened, and former employees who had been silenced found their names restored. The company's profits dipped, but its reputation soared. And through it all, Adrian felt something new, peace. But not everyone shared his vision. Late one evening, as he left the office, Mark intercepted him in the hallway. Sir, we traced that anonymous message. Adrian frowned. And? It came from a secure internal account. Someone inside the company. They've been leaking documents to investors who want you removed. Adrian's expression hardened. Who? Mark hesitated. It's one of the senior partners, your former CFO. Adrian nodded slowly. Of course. He had expected as much. The cost of change was always opposition. Should I alert legal? Mark asked. No, Adrian said. Not yet. Let them try. Truth doesn't need defense, just persistence. He stepped into the elevator, the city lights reflecting off the doors. Somewhere out there, Emily was building a world powered by empathy while he fought to keep one built on integrity. Somehow, they were working toward the same goal from different sides of the glass. And in that shared mission, they had found something unspoken, partnership born not of power, but purpose. The next morning, Emily arrived at Maison Lux early, as she always did. But when she opened the door, something unexpected stopped her. On the counter sat a single envelope with her name written in elegant handwriting. Inside was a small, polished stone engraved with one word, listen. Beneath it, a note. For the woman who taught the world that listening is the first act of understanding. A.W. She traced the letters with her thumb, smiling softly. The city outside roared with sound, traffic, laughter, chaos, but inside the cafe, there was only peace. Emily placed the stone beside the espresso machine, where every customer could see it. It wasn't a trophy, or a gift. It was a reminder, of what had been lost, and what had been found. Because in a world full of noise, some words didn't need to be spoken at all. For a time, it felt like peace had finally settled. Emily poured her mornings into Linguasoul, and her nights into silence. The project was flourishing beyond anything she had imagined. Developers, linguists, and even universities began reaching out for partnerships. What had started as a lonely rebellion had become a global collaboration. And through it all, she had maintained one quiet rule: no corporate interference. Adrian, meanwhile, was fighting a war behind the glass walls of his empire. The storm broke 2 weeks after the LinguaHeart press cycle faded. Late one night, Adrian was still in his office, the city's skyline reflected in the windows like shards of light. He was reviewing quarterly forecasts when Mark entered, looking pale. We have a problem, sir. Adrian looked up, calm but wary. What kind of problem? Internal, Mark said quietly. Someone leaked sensitive financial data, along with your communications about the patent reversals. Adrian's face darkened. Leaked to who? To the press. And, to our competitors. Adrian leaned back, his pulse steady but cold. How bad is it? Mark hesitated. Bad enough that the board has called an emergency session tomorrow morning. They're accusing you of negligence, of compromising proprietary systems for personal ethics. Adrian exhaled slowly. So that's their play. Sir, Mark said carefully, they're preparing to vote for your removal as CEO. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Adrian smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. I wondered how long it would take. The next morning, the boardroom was tense. Cameras had been banned, but the press waited outside like wolves. The board members sat around the long mahogany table, faces grim, voices sharp. One of them, a silver-haired man named Keller, slammed a file onto the table. "You've endangered this company, Adrian. Dissolving patents, opening source code, giving away assets, this isn't morality, it's madness." Adrian's tone was calm. "It's correction." "Correction?" Keller scoffed. "You've cost us millions in shareholder value." Adrian's gaze was steady. "I've restored integrity. I can rebuild wealth. I can't rebuild reputation once it's gone." "Spare us the philosophy," another board member snapped. "We're not here to debate ethics. We're here to determine leadership." "And I assume the vote's already decided," Adrian said. No one answered. Silence confirmed everything. Keller leaned forward. "You built WTech, Adrian. But you forgot what it takes to run it. Compassion doesn't make profits." Adrian smiled faintly. "Neither does corruption." By afternoon, the story broke: WTech CEO faces internal revolt amidst ethics controversy. The markets dipped. Investors panicked. The same journalists who had praised Adrian's integrity now dissected his downfall. He read every headline, not with anger, but with quiet clarity. This was the cost of rebuilding truth. Meanwhile, Emily learned about the chaos the same way the rest of the world did, through the news. She sat in a cafe during her lunch break, her phone buzzing with updates. WTech board moves to oust CEO over Linguahart scandal. Shareholders demand leadership change after costly idealism. She felt her stomach twist. It didn't make sense. Adrian had done the right thing. And yet, in the corporate world, right and ruin often looked identical. "Emily?" Lena asked from behind the counter. "You okay?" She blinked, forcing a small smile. "Yeah. Just thinking." But the truth was gnawing at her. Adrian had risked everything to restore her name. Now, the empire he built was turning against him because of it. That evening, Emily stood outside Tekka's towering glass building, her reflection faint in the polished surface. She had told herself she wouldn't get involved again, that she'd learned to stay away from the machinery of power. But this wasn't about the company anymore. It was about fairness, the same fairness Adrian had once dismissed but eventually embraced. She stepped inside. The receptionist recognized her immediately. "Ms. Chen. Mr. Wu isn't taking visitors today." "Tell him I'm not a visitor," she said simply. A few minutes later, she was standing in his office doorway. Adrian looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Emily. You didn't tell me," she said quietly. He sighed. "It's not your problem to fix." "Don't do that," she said, stepping forward. "Don't push me out of the story again." He met her gaze, exhaustion visible in the lines of his face. "You shouldn't have to carry this. You finally have your freedom. And you gave it to me," she said. "Now they're trying to take yours. That's not something I can ignore." Adrian exhaled slowly, then gestured for her to sit. "They're going to vote me out tomorrow. It's inevitable." "Then stop waiting for permission," she said. "Fight back." He gave a small laugh. "You think they'll listen to me now? I'm the heretic who burned the temple. Then let me speak." He blinked. "You?" "Yes. You gave me my voice back, Adrian. Let me use it." The next morning, the board convened again. The tension was worse this time, the air thick with greed and fear. Keller opened with a speech about stability and responsibility, words that dripped with hypocrisy. The vote was scheduled to follow. But before they could begin, the doors opened. Emily walked in. The room fell silent. Keller frowned. "Who is this?" Adrian stood. "A guest." Emily looked around the room, at the faces of power that had once erased her without hesitation. "My name is Emily Chen," she said clearly. 3 years ago, this company took my work, my identity, and my livelihood. I was told it was for the good of progress. Today, you're trying to erase the man who made that right." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Keller sneered. This isn't your concern, Ms. Chen. We're discussing leadership, not pity. Emily smiled faintly. Then you should understand leadership is exactly my concern. Because leadership isn't about numbers, it's about courage. And Adrian Wu showed more courage in admitting a mistake than this entire board has shown in hiding one. Her words struck the room like glass shattering. You call him reckless for returning what wasn't his, she continued, her voice steady. Then maybe the problem isn't him. Maybe it's the world you've built that punishes integrity. Keller's jaw tightened. You don't understand how corporations work. Maybe not, she said. But I understand people. And the people watching this company now don't see a scandal, they see a choice. Between the past and the future. Between deceit and decency. Silence. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Adrian watched her, something like pride glinting in his eyes. Emily took a step back. You can vote however you want. But when the world reads your decision tomorrow, make sure you're proud of the mirror it holds up. Then she turned and left. Hours later, the results came in. The board was split, half demanded his removal, half refused. In the end, the vote failed by one margin. Adrian remained CEO. When Mark brought him the results, Adrian just smiled faintly. She did it, he murmured. That evening, he found Emily at the cafe again. She was cleaning tables when he walked in, wearing that same faint half-smile she always had when she knew he was coming. You're late, she said. I was busy keeping my job, he replied dryly. She looked up, amused. I heard. Congratulations. Don't congratulate me, he said. You saved me. I just told the truth, she said simply. You did the same for me once. He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. You're dangerous, you know that. I've been called worse. They both laughed quietly. Then, after a pause, Adrian said, they won't stop. The opposition, the investors, they'll keep pushing back. Then we keep standing up, she said. That's what people like us do. People like us, he repeated, curious. She smiled. People who know that power doesn't mean control. It means responsibility. Adrian nodded slowly. You really have changed the way I think. Emily tilted her head. And you changed the way I forgive. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. The tension wasn't heavy anymore, it was full of something unspoken but undeniable. He broke the silence first. Coffee? She smiled. Always. As she poured the cup, Adrian watched her, not as a CEO watching potential, but as a man watching someone who had become his compass. When she handed him the cup, she said quietly, you know, when I first saw you walk into this cafe, I thought fate was mocking me. He smiled. And now? Now I think it was teaching me. That night, as he walked back into the cold Manhattan air, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in years, purpose without pride. He looked up at the glittering towers and thought of all the people still trapped under the same system he'd once served blindly. He wasn't done yet. And neither was she. Because in a world that profited off silence, they had learned the most powerful thing wasn't speaking loudly, it was refusing to stay quiet. Winter eventually melted into early spring, and with it came the quiet transformation of two lives that had once moved in opposite directions. The storm that had nearly torn WTech apart now seemed like a distant echo, but for Adrian and Emily, its aftermath carried something far more valuable than victory, perspective. Linguasoul had grown beyond Emily's imagination. What began as a personal project had become an open-source revolution. Developers from every continent contributed ideas, refining its emotional comprehension algorithms. Linguists praised it as the first technology that truly understood empathy in communication. Universities invited her to lecture, international think tanks requested her consultation. Yet through all of it, Emily stayed grounded. She still worked part-time at Maison Luxe, the same cafe where the story had begun. When asked why, she would simply smile and say, it's the only place where language never lies. Adrian had not escaped unscathed. The rebellion within WTech left scars. Several board members resigned, some investors withdrew, and the company's financial growth slowed. But the loss of capital was outweighed by a gain in credibility. People began to see WTech not as a faceless giant, but as a company guided by conscience. Adrian, once labeled a cold strategist, had become something new, a leader who listened. Still, beneath the surface, his battles weren't over. Power had a way of haunting those who gave it up. There were nights when he stood by his window, staring at the city lights, wondering if he'd done enough, for her, for himself, for the countless unseen voices still waiting to be heard. And every time doubt crept in, he'd receive a message from Emily. Found a new error in the empathy mapping model. Fixed it. Just got invited to speak in Singapore. You owe me coffee when I get back. Remember, progress isn't loud. It whispers. Those words kept him steady. The first time they met again after months of separate growth, it was at a charity gala for the Linguaheart Foundation. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, soft jazz, and the subtle hum of expensive conversation. Adrian arrived late, as usual, wearing a simple black suit. The moment he entered, cameras turned, the fallen CEO turned reformer had become a media fascination. But he wasn't looking for the press. He was looking for her. He spotted her near the stage, Emily, radiant yet understated, speaking with a small group of university researchers. Her poise was effortless now. The woman who once avoided attention had become someone who commanded it naturally. And yet, when she saw him across the room, her smile softened, private, familiar, real. Mr. Wu, she greeted when he approached, the corner of her mouth tilting upward. You're late. Traffic, he replied smoothly. Or maybe I wanted to make an entrance. She arched a brow. You always did like an audience. Not tonight, he said. Just here for one. Her gaze held his, a flicker of warmth beneath the calm. You mean the foundation? Among other things. They both turned toward the stage as the host announced the start of the program. The evening was dedicated to recognizing innovators who'd used Linguaheart's ethical model to reshape communication systems across healthcare, education, and diplomacy. It was surreal to both of them, the project that once represented betrayal now symbolized transformation. When Emily's name was called, Adrian found himself clapping harder than anyone in the room. She walked up to the podium with quiet confidence and spoke without notes. Language is more than words, she said. It's intention. Connection. It's the bridge between who we are and who we hope to be. And tonight isn't about me, it's about everyone who chose understanding over ambition, listening over speaking. This foundation exists because we stopped chasing credit and started sharing creation. Applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed. But Adrian didn't see the spectacle, he saw the person, the same woman who once stood behind a cafe counter, steady and unshaken, when he had tried to test her intelligence. When she returned to her seat, she leaned slightly toward him. Still think words are just tools for deals? He smiled. No. Now I think they're mirrors. Good, she said softly. Then maybe you've finally learned to look. After the gala ended, they slipped away from the crowd and walked along the quiet edge of the East River. The city shimmered across the water, reflected light rippling like language itself, alive, fluid, endless. I never thanked you properly, Adrian said finally. Not for defending me, or for saving WTech. But for something smaller. She looked at him, curious. What's that? For reminding me that leadership doesn't mean being followed. It means earning trust. Emily smiled faintly. You did that yourself. No, he said softly. You showed me how. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the night wrapping around them. There was no need to fill it with words. The air itself seemed to hum with everything they had left unsaid, regret, gratitude, respect, something deeper that neither dared name. In the months that followed, Linguasoul and WTech began to intertwine in unexpected ways. Without formal partnership, their technologies started complementing each other, her emotional algorithms enhancing his company's communication AI, his infrastructure amplifying her reach. It was as if the universe had decided they worked better in quiet collaboration than loud competition. One morning, Emily received an invitation, Advisory Council, WTech Ethics and Innovation Committee. Attached was a handwritten note from Adrian. No contracts. No obligations. Just your voice where it matters. She hesitated before accepting. Not because she doubted him, but because she finally understood what her presence meant, not dependence, but influence. A year later, WTech unveiled its most ambitious project yet, LinguaWorld, an AI-driven communication platform designed to break cultural barriers using emotion-based translation. On launch day, the auditorium was filled with press, engineers, and representatives from across the globe. Adrian took the stage first, his voice steady but charged with something deeper than confidence, conviction. 3 years ago, this company lost its way. We valued ownership over understanding, progress over people. Today, we stand before you with a different mission, to build a world that listens before it speaks. He paused, looking toward the front row, where Emily sat. And this vision would not exist without the woman who taught me that truth is the only language worth translating. The crowd turned toward her, applauding. She lowered her head slightly, modest but moved. When she took the stage after him, she spoke not like a scientist, but like a storyteller. Once, she said, a man ordered coffee in a language he thought no one around him could understand. But someone did. And that moment, small, simple, changed everything. Because connection doesn't begin with words. It begins with the choice to see the person in front of you as equal. The audience was silent, hanging on every syllable. LinguaWorld isn't just about translation, she continued. It's about empathy. It's about remembering that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, the most powerful form of communication will always be the human heart. The applause that followed was thunderous, but it wasn't for technology, it was for truth. After the launch, when the crowd dispersed and the reporters filed their stories, Adrian found her standing by the window overlooking the city, lost in thought. You know, he said quietly, this feels like the end of something. She turned to him, smiling. Or the beginning of something else. He nodded. Maybe both. They stood there in companionable silence until she said softly, do you ever regret any of it? He thought for a long moment before answering. Every mistake, he said, led me to a lesson. Every loss led me here. So no, not regret. Gratitude. Emily's smile deepened. You've learned how to speak my language after all. He grinned. Fluently. That night, they returned once more to Maison Luxe. The cafe hadn't changed, the same flickering bulbs, the same hum of conversation, the same warmth. But to them, it felt like stepping into a photograph, the beginning and the end folded into one frame. Lena looked up from behind the counter and smirked. Well, if it isn't the legend and the reformer. Emily rolled her eyes. Don't start. Too late, Lena said. Your table's still yours. They sat at their usual spot by the window. Outside, the city glowed under a drizzle of rain. Adrian watched her for a moment, then said softly, funny how everything started here. It didn't just start here, she said. It started when you stopped seeing people as background noise. He nodded slowly. And you stopped hiding behind humility. She laughed lightly. Maybe we both learned to listen. Maybe we did. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table, a small polished stone engraved with one word, listen. Her eyes widened. You kept it? Of course, he said. It reminds me that every empire, every dream, every connection begins with one act, listening. Emily looked down at the stone for a moment, then at him. You know, she said softly, for someone who used to think silence was weakness, you've gotten pretty good at hearing what isn't said. He smiled. You were a good teacher. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. The rain grew heavier, tapping against the glass like whispered applause. Neither of them moved. It wasn't awkward, it was content. The kind of silence that only existed between people who no longer needed to prove anything. Finally, Emily said, so what happens now? Adrian leaned back, considering. Now. We build. We teach. We keep creating spaces where voices can't be erased again. She nodded. And coffee? He smiled. Always coffee. They clinked cups, a small ritual, yet somehow sacred. A symbol of everything they had survived, lost, and found again. Months later, a global article headlined, From Betrayal to Breakthrough, How Two Visionaries Changed the Language of the World. The photograph beneath it showed Emily and Adrian side by side at the United Nations, presenting a new initiative that used LinguaWorld to aid humanitarian translation efforts. Behind them, the slogan read, "Understanding is humanity's oldest invention." When the camera flashes faded and the world moved on to its next obsession, they stood backstage, exhausted but proud. "Think they'll remember this?" he asked quietly. Emily smiled. "Maybe not. But someone will hear what we tried to say. And that's enough." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You know what's strange? For someone who started out trying to prove he was the smartest person in every room, I ended up learning the most from a waitress." She laughed. "And for someone who thought success meant recognition, I ended up realizing it meant being understood." They walked out together, into the lights of the city that had once divided them. The streets buzzed with movement, languages blending, stories crossing. Somewhere among them, their story had become more than redemption, it had become a reminder. Because the waitress who spoke in fluent Mandarin and the CEO who finally listened had proved one timeless truth. The world doesn't change when we speak louder, it changes when we start listening.